Hi, everybody. Tonight we have a very, very special music show. It's pertains to one of the most famous music people, Marc Bolan and T.Rex. I want to introduce myself, Spencer Drate, and my partner Judith could not be on, but we are both in the MoMA AIGA Lou Reed NYPL and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archival collection, a very big honor. What makes this tie-in tonight is that it's about Marc Bolan and T.Rex, and these were historic music people. In fact, Marc and T.Rex were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2020. So I consider myself and Judith part of Marc in the fact that we're in that historic collection. I also want to mention a couple of things that tie ourselves with Marc Bolan and T.Rex. Judith and I did two major books, and we made sure that a T.Rex 45 sleeve was in Celebrate Summer and The Groover. I want to just tell you that in my life, one of the most dynamic albums that attracted my eye, being an album cover designer, was The Slider. That album, to me, is one of the great design album covers, with Marc on the front with the hi-hat and bold letters T.Rex. It's just a very stark album cover.
Sure. Yeah, the album was my idea to begin with, and it's kind of a long story how we got there. But Bill and I were working on Bill Kerbishley, the manager of the Who, and I were working on a project, a theatrical project that was going to use songs from London in the 70s from the UK. And he had mentioned Marc Bolan in his catalog to me, and I knew a couple of songs, but not well. And I was a huge Bowie fan, and I was ashamed that I didn't know Marc Bolan. I was young then, and he didn't really hit here the way he did in the UK. So I listened to, which you can now do on Apple and Spotify, I listened to every song from Tyrannosaurus Rex, from Tyrannosaurus Rex to the very end of his career in about 2 weeks. And I went nuts. And I said, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. Amazing things in plural. And I was just so blown away and so moved by the music. But the thing that really struck me was I heard essentially everything in music from the 70s on. I heard the influence of Marc Bolan and his writing and his prowess as a musician and as a singer and as a presenter of songs. And I just couldn't believe that he was not in the same pantheon. And by the way, this was pre-Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction and everything. And Joel Perisman is a neighbor, and I would bug him all the time about it. He said, he'll get in. But in any event, I just thought this was a great American loss that only really smart people or real musicologists and musicians loved and knew Marc's music. You'd be surprised at the amount of people that didn't know his work here. And I somehow got on a mission to rectify that. And I said to Bill, I have an idea. Let's do an album. Let's get big names and other names and just interesting people and do something amazing. He said, it's a great idea. It's a brilliant idea. And then it was really to bring the catalog back so I could do this show. And that never happened. But in the meantime, Bill said, you know what, it's a great idea, Ethan, but no record company in this day and age is going to give us the money to do that. And then a week later, I called and I said, well, how about this? How about if I film the album being recorded? And because everything is multimedia now, and maybe the record company will give us the money then. He said they will. They said, we'll do it. And it didn't happen that easily, but it happened. And the executives there wanted Hal Wilner, whose work I knew, Lost in the Stars, the Kurt Weill album, is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I knew that he could get an eclectic and very starry and interesting group together. So I met him and I thought he was fantastic. And we said, let's do it. And then began the long journey to create the album and create the film. And while I was putting the footage together, I started going through archival footage of Marc and of concert footage and TV footage and interviews. And I thought, oh, wait a second, this is going to have to be bigger. Sorry, I know we're talking about the film later. But anyway, the film turned out to be much bigger than I had planned. It really was just a tool to get the album made. What happened then was the album was finished. Nobody knew what they were going to do with it. Marc did get the announcement came that he was going to be inducted into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So they pushed through the album. And I said, I haven't finished the film. I don't have to finish the film. And they said, well, just make some videos. So I took the footage and I made 4 or 5 videos for the album release, which I think are very nice and all on YouTube now. And the Nick Cave, the Joan Jett, Borns, and Kesha. And I fell so in love with the material again and the footage, I became determined. And then the pandemic happened. I started the videos, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was announced, and the pandemic hit. And it was, what are we going to do? But they released the album, they released the videos, and it kind of came and went. And I then spent the next few years, most of them in the pandemic, finishing the film and putting the film together, because I knew that that would be the lasting document that would really matter, because I feel that the album and the videos got lost in the pandemic along with the induction. I mean, everyone was buying their plane tickets to go to Cleveland, basically. And the next thing we knew, the world shut down. And, you know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame went ahead to, and we should talk about them later because of our connection, this film and the support we've gotten from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that's going to continue. So I'm glad that you're involved with them, because we've become great friends and partners on this project.
Wow, great.
Yeah. So I know that's a long-winded story, but it's a true story. And it is, but everything was only about the album. And I had never made an album. I've worked with a lot of people in the music business, but I know how to make a film, but I didn't know how to make an album. And so I was there for almost all of it, filming and helping in any way I could. And Marc Urselli, that you had on the show to promote the album, who engineered and mixed the film, was just a wonderful, brilliant man. He is a consultant. I'm sorry, I'm getting back to the film. I know you want to stick with the album.
No, go ahead.
But Marc is a consultant to a music festival in Puglia that has been inviting us every year to come and be a part of their music festival.
Wow.
And this June, we're finally going to do it. In June
great.
24. Yeah. And it's all because of Marc.
Wow.
And yeah.
I had the right person on the show, didn't I?
Yeah, Marc's wonderful. And he, you know, Marc, I spent a lot of time with him in the studio, live, but also in the editing room. And I will tell you, no matter what was going on, he was always calm. He was always focused. He was always just so diligent and not a diva. There were a lot of people. Roland was around for a lot of it. And you know, and Richard was there for some of it, doing some background vocals and stuff. But Marc Urselli is a very talented, also Lou Reed guy, very talented, but very lovely human that you want in the room when there's a lot of stuff going on. He's the guy you want. He's great.
And he also won a Grammy, I believe, right?
I think so. Yeah, he's a very accomplished sound designer, mixer, engineer, and he's starting to produce some of his own stuff. as well, and he runs a studio, East Side Sound, downtown. Great guy. And that, you know, that was Hal brought Marc into the project, and
Wow.
we're all lucky for Marc's contribution.
Well, you know, Roland and I both got involved in the record in different ways, but in some ways kind of behind the scenes, because I heard Roland stuff with when he was working on like the track that became the Kesha track was Children of the Revolution. And Roland had a great vibe on that. I heard some versions of that Roland had been working on as well. And Hal called me in to sing with several of the artists on the record, including Kesha and also Lucinda Williams and Todd Rundgren. But I think like with Roland and I were both able to bring some of the authentic T.Rexism so that Marc would have wanted as far as backing vocals and vibe on the track. I think that was very important because Hal, like Ethan, was really not that familiar in a life sense, like with Marc's music. But I think it was important that, and I'm glad that Roland and I were able to, on the East and West Coast, there was an RB, a Rolan Bolan and a Richard Barone, one on each coast, to kind of help bring Marc into the project in some ways. I think that's how I feel about it. You know, some of the artists went way out of the realm of how Marc had written a song, which is cool because Hal Wilner was a brilliant avant-garde producer. Yeah. And so a lot of the arrangements are different than Marc did. But I think it's nice that we were able to bring in some of the T.Rex elements into those arrangements so that it still had the T.Rex flavor. Do you agree with that, Roland? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely say that because when I had an opportunity to meet Ethan and build, that's basically the point where I was really happy to be a part of it and to go in the studio and to hear the approach it was taking. It was done very live, Marc. But Hal was also letting the artists do what they wanted to do. So definitely on the Children of the Revolution track, which is great because I was able to sing the lead on it, and then it became a Kesha track. But there's also something beautiful in the film, which is an alternate version with Macy Gray, which is kind of steals the show in the movie as well. So yeah, it was a unique thing because it definitely did bring that essence of the original T.Rex sound. But when you hear the other songs as well, everyone brought something unique and brought it to now.
Marc, you know, it took me a minute because I was a kid growing up listening to Hot Love and Marc's songs. But then I started realizing how so much of the blues, real Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and you know, the blues performers on Chess Records were a big influence on Marc. And of course, then Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Eddie Cochran, the original rockers were always at the core of T.Rex. Now, I realized that later. I didn't realize it at the time because to me it was something brand new. And Marc was able to mix the old and the new with his music, I think. And he had a lot of blues was in there in the lyric, in the references on the lyrics, and also in the riffs. You know, I mean, he portrayed it in such a new way. That's what made it so special. T.Rex was absolutely of their time. It was in that moment that they were in. But he had echoes of the past. And Howlin' Wolf, he mentions Howlin' Wolf in one song. At the end of Telegram's song, he goes, "I'm a Howlin' Wolf." He's definitely paid tribute to the original.
I was always a Howlin' Wolf. It was one of my first albums, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah.
And the Howlin' Wolf album with a rocking chair on the front with those great Backdoor Man, you know, Rich, Backdoor Man, all those great cuts on there, you know.
Well, that's where rock and roll comes from. You know, comes from a primordial soup. And that's what I teach my students about is how it's really from one source. It's like American music is such an incredible mixture of things. But those blues performers, starting with Lead Belly and all these others, they laid down the law back then.
When you're making a documentary, there are so many interviews that are done that inform the film that are not in the film. And like, for instance, talking about those days, the mod days, the modeling days, et cetera, I spent a lot of time talking to Jeff Dexter. I don't know if you know who Jeff Dexter is. He was a DJ, but he was the original mod. And seriously, that's what he was called.
Yeah.
And he was Mark's best friend from the time they were about 11 or 12 till the end. And so to have someone giving all this information of hanging out on the streets and the clothes, and so I had known a lot of this information from Jeff Dexter. And then when I found the David Bowie thing, I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. It's like so alive. And David Bowie is so funny, and he's David Bowie.
Yeah.
So, you know, I tried to get a feel from, you know, what I learned over a 6-year period and choose the interviews, and we edited them carefully. The David Bowie thing is a classic. I wish I had done it. David unfortunately passed away right before we started the film, which for me would have been thrilling to have him in it on the album, whatever. But his presence is there. And so that's what's behind that. But that information of what Marc was like when he was a preteen and teenager is very, very interesting and very revealing. And he wasn't a musician. I mean, he was starting to be a musician when he had that manager and all of that, when he picked up a guitar and, you know, just, he was called Toby Tyler for a while, which is really freaky because that's based on a character that I was obsessed with as a child. I don't know if you know, Toby Tyler Runs Away to the Circus. Did anybody have that album? And actually, Marc Bolan for a while called himself Toby Tyler. There were so many. Gloria, Marc's partner, Roland's mother, who's part Native American, is very spiritually connected. And so once you know Gloria, you get into these very intense, nothing is an accident kind of conversation and visitations and spirit animals. And she really feels very strongly about the spirit life, and especially the spirit life of Marc. Because I would tell her stories, I would tell her things, and she would just go off. And Gloria said, Ethan, you and Marc know each other, and this is the reason why. And you know, and we'd like get into these heavy conversations about the music and the lyrics. And that was fun. I'm going off the track. But when you make a film, you have a lot of information. This could be a mini series. I have so much information.
Ethan, that's something I really want to praise you for, because you know there's so many different stories and there's so many angles that you could approach it that way, but how it all combines, and even if you don't have a clue of who Marc Bolan is or anything about the music, you really get to go down this path as a musician, as a person, and involving the making of the album and all of us together. So really, thank you for that. I mean,
well, listen, I was very lucky, Roland, because people opened themselves up to me. I mean, starting with you, and then, you know, Richard, who was so generous, and a musicologist, as said in his bio, and a certainly Bolan expert, president of the American Marc Bolan Teenage fan club as a teenager. I mean, he's really, I brought his memorabilia. Some of it I shot for the film. But I was very lucky, and finding Jeff Dexter was really crucial. Alan Edwards, who has worked with Bill for 40-50 years as the publicist for The Who, was David Bowie's publicist for 40 years and very close to him. He was Marc's publicist the last 5 years of his life. So he had a lot of records of things, and he had never really spoken about Marc much. So I had a lot of access to, and Alan is in the film, but I had a lot of access to some very interesting information and very intimate information. That was wonderful. So that's the one thing about a film getting delayed a long time, because every time you go back and do another cut, the editor or somebody says, what about this? What about this? And then you just go down that road. Gloria was the last interview. And it was only because Michael Taylor, one of the editor said, Ethan, you've got to. And I said, okay. And through Rolan, we tracked her down in Sierra Leone, and that confirmed a lot of what I was doing. Gloria and Rolan refused to look at any footage. I just want everybody to know that. They were intimately involved in the film. They were intimately involved with me. But they never wanted to see anything, any footage, anything. They said, Ethan, we just want you to, we trust you, just go. They saw it for the first time at Tribeca when the film was finished, which is, I'm telling you, to have family members and people who were so close to Marc not ask for that kind of approval is extraordinary. And but they gave me unbelievable access to everything. So that I feel very fortunate to have formed those relationships, but they did not have any editorial input at all, except, we really like this. And that's, I mean, I don't know if you know about filmmaking, but that's really hard to get. Everyone who appears in the film who's alive or who's not alive, their estates, everything that's in the film, that footage is approved. Every star, every singer, famous, not famous, everyone, every interviewee, everybody had approval. And Rolan and Gloria, for whatever reason, decided, you can ask Rolan, he's right here. I don't know why, but they just wanted to see it when it was done. And I found that extraordinary, especially because of the kind of things they told me.
Right.
So Rolan, I'm going to throw this back at you. Is this the truth, Rolan? I mean,
yeah, it's definitely the truth. But the thing is, you came in very classy and you brought an integrity to the legacy. It could have went so many different angles, and you kept it real. And I think if my dad was alive, he would have been like, "This is exactly what I want to show. This is me. This is how I lived, and that's exactly how it was meant to be." And plus, we were able to develop a friendship. I know my mother would have probably got wild if she had to get there, but she didn't. And at the end of the day, we have a great product, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the world to see it.
Thank you so much, Rolan. We opened in the UK in September because when we did Tribeca, we did not have the rights to all of the archival and the songs and everything. We just had like one festival right to show it. And needless to say, it was very, very expensive and time-consuming to complete the film. It took a year after Tribeca. And the UK pursued us that entire time since Tribeca. So we knew we had to make it work right away for them. And now that we're complete, now that we've opened in the UK, we're ready to do North America and the rest of the world.
Oh.
And when we do that, I know that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wants to be involved. So I'm so pleased that this is the first American piece of journalism that's been done about the film. Wow. I was reluctant to do it because we hadn't done a North American sale yet. And you just said, it'll take a long time to get on, but I'm thrilled. Obviously we did a lot of press in London and the UK. But this is the first American. I mean, we did press for the album, and thank you so much for that. But we haven't done our big rollout yet.
The film really completes the album for me.
Yeah.
Because it's the story. The music is great on the album, and the film really helps explain it. And the film is what's especially, I think, important about Ethan's film is that it focuses on the songwriting for Marc, not just the glamour and the wildness of T.Rex, but really the creativity and songwriting aspect of T.Rex. I think that is something that people don't always focus on, and this film does.
Thank you, Richard.
Well, you're welcome. And the album, of course, again, focuses on the songwriting. Both the film and the album share that focus. And it's important because Marc is not always seen as an important songwriter. But I can't begin to tell you how many bands, artists that I know personally and that I don't know personally were influenced by Marc Bolan and T.Rex and those records.
Yeah, it's incredible. And if they don't admit it,
Yeah. A lot of them don't. A lot of them.
And I'm telling you, I am not a musicologist. I don't read music, whatever, but I am telling you, I could find licks, lyrics, and themes that so many people use in their music since the mid 70s from Marc.
Absolutely.
And it's so apparent. I mean, I'm talking about like specific guitar licks. Like Marc, as Richard said, Marc took from Eddie Cochran and Chuck Berry, and you said Howlin' Wolf, all of that for sure. But he turned it into his own thing. There's a lot of people who took Marc stuff and did not turn it into their own thing.
Yeah,
but
I hear
nobody. Yeah,
I hear artists that sound so much like Marc. There's an artist, Ty Segall.
Oh yeah, he did a whole.
His whole like T.Rex is one of his solo albums. You know, there's so much influence. I mean, that's a current artist, and there's so many people now. I hear their music. I hear so much T.Rex, but you know, the thing about it also, his lyrics, if you want to get specific on what is so imitated, is his kind of minimalism. Like groups like the Ramones and a lot of the punk rockers got a lot from the minimal. Like think of songs like Solid Gold, Easy Action, like it's on the album. It's a very obscure kind of minimal lyric, and that style influenced a lot of the punk rockers that came after, I think.
Oh yeah, I thank you for bringing that up. I'm very proud of that in the film, that when we got to the third act, you know, I got to say it explicitly and find footage, find photographs, and find footage of Marc talking about the Sex Pistols and the Ramones. He loved them and they loved him. The other thing you have to know about Marc, about that period in the late 70s, is that the established rockers were very reluctant about punk rock, and they felt threatened. They felt they were being usurped, for sure. They actually weren't, but it was a revolution that happened in music. And Marc was right there at the front of it, touring with the Damned and appreciating these people. People who were in their late 20s, like Marc, were considered the old guard. Old and, you know, kind of showy and full of it and not authentic to teenagers. Billy Idol in the beginning, which is why it's the circle of Billy Idol, says you saw a bit of punk rock right there in 1971 with his attitude. And then we end with him actually, you know, it wasn't just Generation X and the Jam who were in the film, but there were a lot like the Boomtown Rats he put on TV, I think, for the first time on his show. He toured, as I said, with the Damned. So, you know, he put his money where his mouth is, and he really got behind these people. And that's significant. And you don't see a ton of that today. And you certainly don't see it with people who are coming in to, you know, break down the walls. He thought that was funny. He thought that was great. He thought the energy of that was great. And also what was so great to me about Marc is that he was just authentic, but wasn't a music snob. And he went from folk as an artist. I mean, you know, he had been in the mod kind of punkish area of the mod thing, touring with the Who and stuff with John's Children. But he was, you know, Bob Dylan, Donovan influenced, folky, electric, glam rock. But then when he wasn't number one anymore, he was still doing disco before white artists were doing it. Before all of them, there were no white rock and rollers with electric guitars doing disco.
Well, and thanks to Gloria, he was able to collaborate with the Ike and Tina Turner and a lot of R&B and soul artists.
It's just, you know, he was so ahead of his time, and he was fearless. And so I'm so proud, and I'm glad you're going to, you know, that you did the cover for the Groover single, because, you know, the Groover was an important milestone for him. I really believe that. It wasn't a number one single, but very, very important. And then to go from there to punk is fantastic. And like Richard and I were around the club scene at the same time. I worked at a club where the bongos played. But in New York at that moment, and I think it's one of the reasons why Marc loved New York at that time, is punk and disco were not enemies for a few years there. It became a joke that it was this disco sucks thing because the melange, the mix was very real. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein knew it with Blondie, with Heart of Glass and all of that. And they worked with rap artists on Rapture. But right, Richard?
Yeah.
New York at that time, it was the really cool people liked all of it.
Absolutely. And, there were clubs that were rock discos like Hurrah.
That's where I worked. Yeah.
That's where Bowie went to do the video for his song, I Am the DJ. That's done in the club Hurrah.
I know. He did fashion. I found the choreographer for fashion.
That was cool.
But that's, yeah.
That's an example of a club that was really a mix of soul and disco and rock, And the B-52s came out of that scene also.
Yeah, exactly. B-52's first date in New York was at Hurrah. But that's where I met the Ramones. So when I started working at Hurrah, it was a disco. And there was a play on with Divine called The Neon Woman. And then, so you'd see The Neon Woman, and then it was a disco. And but then Studio 54 opened, and it was like, there was no competition, our little Hurrah. So the owners decided, let's do a new wave, which was the music that was starting then, a new wave dance club. This was pre-Mud Club, pre-Danceteria. And they were successful at that. And it was the first time, maybe since like the Peppermint Lounge or something, where rock and roll was like a disco-y thing. Mm-hmm. And the new wave sound was, B-52s, as Richard was saying, all these people. But it was in this club that the Ramones played, and I was a waiter. I mean, I brought their beer into the dressing room, and that's how I met them and Danny and Linda.
But imagine if Marc had lived. If Marc had lived, that was just before, because soon after he passed is when this happened. This music, this mixing of the disco and rock, and Marc would have been right on time with that.
He was new wave.
Yeah,
absolutely,
he was new wave.
Richard. I mean, that's why you're the bongos who were.
And that's why we had to do
new wave Mambo Sun.
That's why we had to do it, because it was like the perfect song that really put that together.
How? By the way, how, as avant-garde as Hal was, Hal was very aware and very much around, because we're all the same age-ish, Richard, and Hal and I.
Yeah.
Hal's a little older, but not much. Yeah. And he was around Hurrah. And we talked about that period also, which is why I knew Hal would be so good for the album, because he liked rock and roll. He liked everything. He just, and then he would put this weird jazz spin on things, which
he was amazing.
Amazing. But it was, I don't know that music, it's so sad to me. Yeah. Because Marc was so modern and so unafraid, and I'm glad that I got to celebrate all these genres that I love in this 96-minute film and on this album. Because there's no barriers. And also, Richard, you do folk music, folk music is not divorced from this.
But I'm such a rocker, really.
I know, but
I do love folk music.
But look at the songs that Devendra Banhart did, that Lucinda did, that Beth Orton did with Hippie Gumbo. All of those kind of folky, acoustic-y things were, Marc's spin on it was more avant-garde, certainly than Bob Dylan and Donovan.
Oh yeah, he loved Donovan. He loved, and Donovan really, really liked him.
Of course,
I'm best friends with Donovan, and he mentions Marc a lot. Marc gave him a scarf once, back in I guess it was in the late '60s or early '70s when T.Rex opened for Donovan, and Donovan kept that scarf in his guitar case for years, because it was like he liked Marc a lot and liked the music, and he understood that that he had been sort of an influence on him in some ways. You know.
Oh yeah, it's speaking of all these genres, and Spencer, I'm so glad you liked the album because
Oh, I love the album. Oh my God.
I said to Roland, you know, Roland was saying, "What are you most proud of?" And I said, "I think the thing I'm most proud of is that I had this theory that the Marc Bolan of Tyrannosaurus Rex is not different than the Marc Bolan of T.Rex." And I really believe that. I believe that all of these marks are deeply connected. And if you listen carefully to the lyrics and you listen carefully to the music, you will hear the continuum. When you go to the end, to Futuristic Dragon, we're kind of back at the beginning,
Definitely.
but it's kind of psychedelic and
electronic.
electronic. So
Yeah,
it's,
Yeah.
but I don't think, it's not like he left movements. He left the mods. He left the folkies. He left that crowd. He left the glam. It was always a continuum of a love of music, which is popular sounds with his own creative spin.
A true artist, in other words.
Yeah.
This is one of the best. I've viewed many music doc movies since 2010, many directors, many filmmakers. This is one of the best films I ever saw and
Oh my
felt
God.
in my heart.
Well,
And I'm happy for Roland on top of this because he knows this is a culmination for his father in the right way. And he met the right people. And everybody, including Richard, everybody involved, Ethan, anybody involved, it was a beautiful thing, you might say. And I'm happy for Roland. I want to tell you, I'm very happy from you, from my heart,
I
because
appreciate that.
because it really was a culmination. And besides that, your father was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is a just thing. So that's just from me. I just want to say that.
well, thank you. We made it. I mean, that's enough. Considering the last
It's a big accomplishment now.
we finished it, and
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that. But if what you're saying is true, it's because it was made with heart. There was a lot of heart in this, and a lot of love. And I never, once I started, I never wanted to stop.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of tragedy, including losing Hal to COVID.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting project that I feel forever, transformed by. And I'm just so proud of the reception we got in the UK. I hope it's going to be the same in the rest of the world.
I want to ask you a question. Who did the editing on the film? It was really good editing on it.
I had two editors. I started with Michael Taylor, and Michael was passionate about T.Rex in this project. And he was very important in things like, you better talk to Gloria, Ethan. And these are the things you need to talk to her about. And what I thought was going to be 1 3-hour session, which he would have been happy with, turned out to be 8 hours over a month. It was a very intense Zooming interaction between the two of us. But Michael did a lot of the research as well of the archival, and he really helped put my vision that I had into something even better. And then his assistant, Alexander Frost, he was his assistant on the project. He didn't know much about T.Rex either when he started. Young man. He's about 20 at the time. No, he was about 29 or 30 when he started. But he was the one who organized all the drives. You'll appreciate this, Patrick. He organized hours and hours of drives during the pandemic. So there was a guy, and he would get on the phone. Where did this happen? Where did that happen? And he, over a few months, he knew this material, if not as well as me, better than me. And he then worked very closely with Michael and I. Michael had to move on to another project when I finally got the money to do the final cut. But I had a hunch about the young assistant, and I just said, I want to finish it with Alex. And Alex and I just had the most incredible experience. And he took what we had started with Michael, which was, I loved that 2-hour, 40-minute version. And we made this version, and Alex is brilliant, and he's extraordinary. And it was really nice having someone that young on the project. And he brought a certain freshness that I needed. Do you have a moment? I want to tell you one thing about the editing that's a good story.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm sure everybody has this experience in their life with whatever they do. But when you're a director in theater and film, there's a moment where you finish, you're in previews, you have cuts, you whatever, and everybody's got an opinion. Your friends, the people who are the artists, the money people, everybody's got an opinion. And you need those opinions. That's part of the process. You need the notes to make the film better. I had so many opinions on the long version, I was losing my mind. And I'm a teacher. I know that I need the notes. I know I need the help. And I couldn't hear anything. My brain just was, and it was locked down. It was just very tense time. And I thought, if I could get notes from anybody, who would they be? Who would the person be? And I thought, Martin Scorsese, because I like his documentaries. Now I'm being told I need to get this down to 90 minutes. He doesn't do 90-minute films. He does 3-hour films. But he knows music, and he edits well to music, and he knows the history of rock and roll.
Right.
And I met the guy once, and I thought, I don't think nobody in his office, nobody's going to return a call and email.
Oh my God.
And I didn't, and I just looked up all the films, and I was looking, scouring IMDb and stuff, and I saw that the editor of almost all these films, and now his co-director, was the same person on all the rock documentaries, the music docs. So I wrote that guy a letter. And I said, I see that you and Marty are doing a David Johansen thing. I have a lot of David Johansen footage I'm not using. Maybe I can exchange some of the footage, even though I haven't been signed. He hasn't signed it over yet, but you've got his permissions for his. So maybe I'll give you the footage if you give me some notes. It was like, I don't know what I wrote. He wrote back to me a week later and said, Ethan, I do have some time. Marty's off making Killers of the Flower Moon, whatever he was doing. And he said, but I remember you fondly from high school.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Oh my God.
I loved your parents. My father bar mitzvahed him. I mean, it was.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
he said, I will do this. I will give you notes.
That's great.
So
Wow.
better than getting Marty's notes, which would have been great, I got his editor to give Alex and I notes on the final cut.
Oh my God.
But he didn't give technical notes. He didn't say, cut this, add this. They didn't do any of that. He basically directed me. He talked to me like a director. What do you want to say here? What do you want to say there? It was just such a beautiful. But David Tedeschi came to me like in a Gloria Jones, Marc Bolan spiritual way. He just landed, and we're great friends now. But this is, this was someone from my past, and I had no idea.
That's
I had
great.
no idea. And he really, it was very beautiful. Just a few hours that we spent on Zoom together with Alex, and Alex and I felt energized and inspired by David's discussion of the film. And so the editing was a long process. It happened over many periods, but that's like a great filmmaking story.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what are the chances that I would reach out to the Martin Scorsese world and I would hear from David, and he knew me, and he did it as a favor. Thank God he likes the film.
That's nice.
It was worth it. But anyway, that's the story I want to tell about the editing.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I want to thank all of you for being on. And Richard, Your book, Music Plus Revolution, where can people get it?
Wherever books are sold, yes, Amazon. But I want to give one shout out to Tony Visconti, who produced the original T.Rex albums, and who really framed Marc's songs in a great way that made them classics too.
That's
the sound,
true.
the sound of the records that gave Hal then a great springboard to work from. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So I just want to give a shout out to Tony. But yes, thank you for plugging my book. I love my book, and it's also my textbook at the New School where I teach a class, Music and Revolution.
Roland, wonderful. I love you, man. I love you.
Love you too, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and
Thank
Richard
you so much.
and Ethan.